Welcome to the East End Education Forum. Today's topic is learning to read, theory, practice, and home support. My guests today are Michael Cox, the assistant principal from Hampton School. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me.
And Toni and Schmitt, reading specialist from John Marshall Elementary School in East Hampton.
Hi, thanks for having me.
And I'm the host, Bob Tymann. So, reading is the foundation of everything you're going to learn in school. I mean, it really is. And going back to the commercials when I was a little kid, reading is fundamental. Yes, it is. And still to this day, we're having conversations about how should we teach reading, which I think many people would think is amazing, but I don't think people realize how complex that process is. So hopefully today we can shed some light on the controversies between whole language, phonic instruction, and where this all fits together into an intelligent reading program for our students. And then having people understand the process that allows the brain to retrieve all this, which is incredible. And then some things we can do at home, some things parents can do at each different level to help their children succeed. So let's start with phonics and whole language. Since I've been in education 30 plus years at this point, cueing theory, the whole language, has seemed to dominate the instruction in reading. Can you, Mike, give us it in a nutshell, not too short a nutshell, but an explanation for the non-educator about what we're talking about when we say whole language?
Well, I'll speak to your three cueing systems first.
Okay.
The three cueing system is not something that is unknown to educators. It is made up of three major parts. It's the meaning, the visual or structure, and the visual aspect of it. Some refer to it as the MVC.
So, go ahead.
Yeah, or MSV. I'm sorry, the MSV, which is the meaning in the syntax, which is the structure, and the visual aspect of which is the graphophonics. So it's semantics, syntactical, and graphophonic. Which, for anybody who doesn't know those terms because they sound super fancy, it's meaning making. It's making sure the sentence structure makes sense and the word makes sense in it, and also visually, you're using those cueing systems to help you to essentially deduce meaning from a text. But that's been kind of under scrutiny lately, the three cueing system. It is something that in a lot of the programs that are used is heavily weighted on. It's also something that is used in parallel and in tandem with literacy assessments, where you do see various miscues in those different areas, and then you figure out how a student is performing based on those reading assessments. You might be able to speak to that a little bit further as a reading specialist, but that cueing system is something that is actually widely used. But also is under, I wouldn't say scrutiny, that's kind of strong, but it's definitely being reflected on as something whether we use or not.
Toni, can you add anything to that?
Well, it's, when you sit down and read with a child, you're doing an inventory of their reading. So, like Mike was saying, does it look right? Does it sound right? Does it make sense? So if a child is looking at a word, you're looking at how they attack that word and what cueing system are they using? Are they chunking the word? Are they blending it? Are they going based on memory? Are they using context to figure out the meaning of the word? And are they just guessing? So are they going through the text? And as you're reading with the child, you're taking notes and you're listening, and that's helping you understand them as a reader. So it's not, it's diagnostic in a sense where you're just doing an inventory based on that child. So it's a conversation that you're having with them. So you're doing this inventory to understand them as a reader, so you can then plan your instruction with them in a reading group or in a one-on-one intervention. So then afterwards, you can have a comprehension conversation once you've given them the word, if they didn't read it correctly, and then to see if they have understood the text.
I often, when I read about cueing systems and the different systems that a lot of them coming out of Columbia,
Right.
When they say context, they're talking about looking at the page and looking at pictures and hints
Right.
that will let you know what the word might mean. Is that, I mean, that makes sense as a strategy to figure out a word,
Sure.
but I don't know if it always sounded like it should be a last resort, not a first resort, to me.
Well, for younger readers, it's a good beginning strategy because there are going to be words in the text that they can't decode yet, that they haven't learned those sounds or they haven't learned those decodable strategies like chunking or looking for root words within the word or looking for the word families or the vowel teams or the blends. So if there's a word like sunflower, and there's a picture of a sunflower, they can maybe match that to the text, and then maybe the sentence is I see a sunflower, and they know the words I see a, and then they look at the picture, oh, a sunflower, and then they can make that connection, and that will help them understand the meaning of the text as they're reading. So as the children get older and they read, the pictures become less and less. So then they are learning those strategies and they are able to use those decoding strategies as they read.
Good.
It's also interesting on the other side because you're right, Toni Ann, is that as they get older, those pictures become less and less. But the dependency on those pictures at an early age can actually hinder the long-term reading.
Yes,
If that is
I-
becoming their strategy, their main strategy to deduce meaning from the text, yes, sunflower, absolutely. I can see even in my own children as they navigate the reading process. But like you said, that it goes away and then that dependency becomes back on, do I understand these words? Can I decode these words?
Right.
And the strategy of understanding the very specifics and the nuances of the words and the word patterns, that becomes the priority. And if that foundation is not there, yes, they can lean on these pictures, but
Agreed.
they're going to need that later on.
Right. It's just another tool for them
Yep.
to utilize
Absolutely.
as early readers until they
But-
have those strategies.
Yeah.
And I agree, I probably still use it, we probably all still use it at times, but should it be, I feel like to the whole language programs that I've observed, it seems very foundational. Whereas phonics and breaking down the sounds and trying, doing that process that I was taught to read with, seems to be a last resort. And I'm not sure, is that how it is in most programs?
I personally don't think so.
Okay,
Do you
good.
think that?
No, I would say, like, it depends on the program. It's
Right.
really situational.
Agreed.
So when you brought up TC, and TC, historically, generally speaking, usually the way when a student came to or a child came to an unknown word, there were different kind of scripted things that you would say, right? Does this make sense? Take a look at the pictures, right? What could you put in there that would make this sentence make sense? Guess a word and see if that would work. So what was happening was, and what's happening actually now that you bring this up, and probably while we're sitting here today, is because there's a lot of dialogue and research that is supporting the specifics with regard to the words themselves and the phonemes in the word and paying attention to those, as opposed to looking everywhere else but the word itself, right? Even in some cases, and this has happened in different TC programs, and they have been proven to be successful programs too. They're so widely used on the East End, on Long Island, and across the country. But what's happening, and in this program, you've even seen that if there's an unknown word, putting a Post-it over it and saying, what could fit in this sentence, which again supports the program's idea of saying, look everywhere else but the word. And I think right now, the conversations are kind of, the pendulum is shifting back towards, well, let's start looking at the word, and let's start focusing on decoding. So foundations, Wilson-based programs, they're all doing that really specific direct teaching of those skills that students need to be able to decode appropriately and then eventually deduce meaning from those decoded words.
I mean, there are pieces of whole language, as I understand it, that make a hell of a lot of sense to me. Having a print-rich environment, small reading groups, having students access to literature that reflects their world, not Dick and Jane that I grew up with, where it was all, it was middle-class white America was the only thing depicted in the readers, which just didn't resonate with many of our students. So that all makes perfect sense to me. But I still struggle with not breaking down and working on that phonemic awareness, which I get sounds really boring. And I think that's why whole language kind of evolved, because we were using these Dick and Jane readers, which didn't speak to many of the students. And we were doing what probably is a boring process for the teacher of breaking down each word into its letter sounds and relating it to your already known vocabulary, your spoken vocabulary. But it seemed to work. So, I don't know. I don't know what the foundation should be of the program. And I'm hoping to learn that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I'm bothered by having them guess at the word. I'm thinking to myself, okay, there's got to be a better strategy than guessing.
Agreed.
So what should be?
Well, I don't think you're the only one that's bothered.
Yeah, I know.
Because, and honestly, of late, because there is a lot of it's not even old. I mean, the science of reading is almost like being rebirthed, in conversations. Just understanding that reading is not just a natural process. You don't naturally just learn to read. It's not instinctual. It's not, it's something that has to be taught directly. You can immerse students in a print-rich environment. You can surround them with texts. You can flood them with literature and books, and that's great, and that's a piece of the puzzle. It's not something
I would never
that's
want
a
to let
have.
that go.
No, that is a have to. But I think that there are other pieces that have to be also included and even brought to the forefront as opposed to just a print-rich environment. Those specific word work and those word strategies to be able to decode. And to get the brain to understand these different patterns and how these words actually work, even mostly irregular words too. These students really have to understand and develop these patterns and these rules to support their decoding skills, to be able to essentially deduce meaning. It can't just be, let's guess the word, let's see what would make sense, because there can be things in there that may make sense, but take away from the meaning of the bigger picture of the text.
And might not be the
It's
word.
situational. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean,
They might be synonymous, but it's still not the word.
it's still
right?
not the word.
You're not learning the word that you may have otherwise struggled with.
Reading has to be precise. And it seems like this whole language is comfortable, nice, but not very precise. And I think the philosophy is eventually they will master it because it's natural. And I agree with you that it's not natural. You know what I mean? When you think about instinct and natural processes, the hunter-gatherers didn't know how to read. There's that, I'm going to say it right, orthographic mapping. Did I say it correctly? Okay.
Sound symbol relationship.
I'd like to try to tackle that, because when I was reading about that's it. Okay, this makes sense to me. This is how the brain stores this information and gets us to the point where we read without thinking about each word, because we know we're just pulling the meaning out of it, that fluency. This orthographic mapping is the process by which the brain accomplishes that. Do any of you feel comfortable digging into that a little bit?
Sure.
Yeah.
It's, putting sounds to symbols and putting that into their long-term memory. And you can do that through visuals, through hands-on activities, visual, auditory, kinesthetic, tactile. You said it's boring. It does not have to be boring. Absolutely.
Good point.
You can teach phonics a million different ways and make it fun, and it should be fun. It should be quite the opposite. Kids should be tapping, singing, dancing, using sand, using grids to tracing on crayons.
Slow down, because
I'm sorry, I get excited.
No.
That's why you're in the position that you're in. That's not a bad thing. That's not a bad thing at all.
Could you explain tapping? Because I've seen that in many classrooms,
Right.
and it works. And just go, what do we mean tapping?
So, it's just it's another, tactile way of approaching a word. So if they see a word, well, first you teach the child how to tap, so finger tapping. So you use your fingers to tap out a word. So say the word is hop. You teach them how to tap each sound. Hop. And then you teach them that strategy that when they come to that word, that they can finger tap. And you want to see them actually finger tap. And then as they get more comfortable with it, they can tap it on their leg, they can tap it under the table, so not everybody's seeing them tap, and it'll help them to decode the words as they're reading. But it also helps them break down the sounds in their mind. And they can do the syllabication, with the tapping, they can chunk the words with the tapping. They can clap out the syllables.
Chunking is,
Chunking is when you take the sounds chunks of words and you break it down. So say the word is, let me think of a good word, like cleaning. You take the blend, cool, and then the vowel team is EA, and then N is N, and then ing, and then they chunk it cool, ing. So what's the blend at the beginning? What's in the middle? What's the ending? Ing, and then you chunk it and then you blend it together.
and cleaning would be 3 taps.
Cool, ing, yes.
Okay, right.
Yeah, but that also relates directly with orthographic mapping because
It's a sound symbol
what you just,
relationship.
exactly, but what you just mentioned, like you can have, if you have a hop, right, and you looked at that as the 3 specific sounds, when you're talking about orthographic mapping, it's the sound symbol relationship. So
Right.
when she talked about a vowel team of EA, that's 1 sound, 2 letters.
Right.
So when you're
Right.
looking at orthographic mapping, it also gives you the opportunity, like you say, chunking out these things, to really break this thing apart so that visually a student can see that EA is a vowel team that gives you the long E sound, right?
Mhm.
Or that if you're looking at like the word does, tough one. If I
Challenging word.
ask somebody to write does, they're gonna write D-U-Z.
Z,
More often
phonetically.
than not, phonetically, that's how it
Yeah,
sounds,
yeah.
Z, right? 3 sounds. So if you're using that in an orthographic sense, then you would have the D isolated, right? You have the OE isolated, and then you would have the S. And so when a student now sees that orthographic mapping visually there, then you can have conversations about the different rules that apply to these different teams of letters that make specific sounds. Because once they start seeing it visually, they start hearing it,
Right.
then they can start to commit that to long term. Because then it becomes that, I mean, you can call it high frequency, you can call it, not high frequency, because high frequency and sight words are totally different. So a sight word is what eventually you want it to become. You want them to be able to commit this to long-term memory that when they see it,
It becomes automatic.
becomes automatic.
So you want to build up an incredible dictionary in your brain of sight words.
Right, correct.
Yes.
And that will help
Okay.
them become more fluent
And
readers.
that is when you can start becoming fluent.
Right. And then you can also, when I teach decodable words versus sight words, I use colors. So when I teach a decodable word, I use green, whether I write it in green marker or green crayon. And when I teach sight words, I write them in red. So because red can go into your long-term memory and green helps them recognize it as a decodable word. And they know that that's a word that they can tap or that they can chunk it.
Okay, but the decodable words, eventually you want them to come up just like sight words too. Is that true?
No, it depends on the word. Like, there are lists of words that cross over to the other side, I guess. I don't know
Yeah.
how else you could say that.
Yeah.
Like, there are some words that become decodable, or, some decodable words that become sight words.
I think everything eventually will become a sight word.
Eventually.
I'm not saying
Right.
everything is
Right.
strong.
Yeah,
That's strong.
Yeah, that is
but
a strong word.
It's
still
not
look-
everything. I
still
mean,
look
I could,
things
I,
up.
look, I mean, it's same,
Yes.
same,
Right.
same. But at the end of the day, and I don't want to misquote this, but there's a book called The 6 Shifts, and it talks about incorporating the science of reading in a balanced literacy classroom. And what it does is it outlines 6 major misconceptions in reading. And it's written by Carrie Yates and co-authored with somebody else. And what is written in this book is that there are 13 little words that make up almost 50% of of most of the children's books that they'll see. And there are 109 high-frequency words that have been set in this list that you mentioned. The lists are different, but this is a high-frequency word list of 109 words that if you knew that at sight, then you would be able to read almost 90% of children and adolescent books because they occur so frequently. The reason why I say that is because when you're talking about decodable words, and the words that are in there are a combination of irregular words and regular words that are easily and phonetically accurate. But what happens is if students start to commit these to long-term memory, they're not struggling with an over-decoding of the text, which eventually will just ruin their meaning. So when you're going through an assessment with a student and they're having difficulty decoding, they're losing the meaning because they're over-mediating on that word. The meaning is gone. Now they're focusing on that word so much that combination of understanding the word and the big picture of the meaning of the text, which at the end of the day, that's what we want. We want meaning making from reading, right?
Yes.
They have to have those decoding skills. And to bring it back to your point with regard to the focus on that, that's why that has to be a priority. And that's why actually most programs are making that a priority. Even TC, as they came out with the phonics and are even revisiting that
I know
phonics piece too.
they've gone back and made some adjustments.
Yes.
That was the 6 shifts? That was the name of that book?
Yes.
Okay, cool.
It could be a little more than that, but if you went to the 6shifts.com, it would bring up that book.
The 6.
There might be more to the title,
Gotcha.
so
Okay.
don't quote me on that. Wherever the camera is that I need to look at, yeah, so, but it's a good one. It's a good one for educators, 100%.
So in this orthographic mapping, a student is taking what they already know is spoken language. So they have a picture in their head of bed, and they know how to say bed.
Right.
And now they're trying to match the sounds of those symbols on a page with what they already know.
Right.
And when they've accomplished that, it's mapped. Is that
I think it's fair.
okay? Which makes sense,
Right.
because you're building, this is all attached to the oral language you already have. And that's what makes it so retrievable from long-term memory then, which that makes sense to me. That seems logical, which I like things to be logical.
We're making sense today.
Yeah, well, we'll try.
Sense
We're
making.
trying.
Yeah.
Okay, integrating the two systems then. Okay, what would this look like if we integrate, let's take kindergarten, okay? Where a student's gonna walk in and have a system where they've got the best of both. They've got the print-rich environment and that literature that speaks to them, and they're gonna learn the basics of phonics and how to break apart words into their sounds and do this mapping, this orthographic mapping. What's that gonna look like?
What does the classroom look like?
What does the classroom look like? What would a lesson feel like? You know, what steps should happen? Too much?
Well, it's a
It's very complex. It is not a quick answer. It's
No,
not-
no, I don't
Because
want
every single, you imagine 20 students in the class for the sake of
Right.
numbers.
Right.
They're
Right.
all coming in with different experiences. At home with their immersion in literature, you can't automatically assume that
Different
everyone's coming in
languages.
different languages.
Right.
So that is a very complex question. So
right.
forgive us for
No.
sitting
I
here.
was just
Because
trying
it's,
to
it
picture it
can't be,
first
because
before
it
I
can't be
spoke
summed
about
up
it.
in one thing. I mean, at the end of the
No.
day, you want to understand the readiness of every single student that comes in.
Right.
So that there are assessments that you give to see the readiness. You can have
Right.
conversations with the pre-K teacher because they're doing a lot of that later on in the year. But at the end of the day, it's pre-K. When they're coming into kindergarten, that's when they really start. That's when you really have to get this ball rolling with the foundation for these students. So determining that readiness and then planning from there is the biggest piece. You have to know where they are because they're all coming in at different levels with different experiences and different languages.
Right,
So that's step one.
right.
Yeah, I
Step
would
one,
say, yeah.
knowing your children,
Knowing them,
Knowing
yeah.
students.
knowing where they
readiness,
are
yeah.
in this
Absolutely.
process.
Doing alphabet assessments.
Absolutely.
You know, sitting one-on-one and getting to know them, like Mike said, knowing their language levels.
And now, I know when I was observing a lot of small group, large group, small group, large
Right.
group, individual, is that still a pattern that exists?
No, you know, there's lot of whole group instruction, but then they, our school still uses a balanced literacy approach. So, you can do a whole group lesson, but then you are putting the kids into reading groups based on their reading level or skill. So it could be a skill group as well. And we use, multiple forms of data in order to create those groups. So some groups are working independently, some might be working with a teaching assistant, some might be working with a co-teacher, and the kids are getting their instruction and rotating through their groups with the teacher. And some might be working on phonics, some might be working on comprehension. It depends on the level of the child. So, we have, E&L push-ins at our school. We have bilingual classes. So there's a variety. I mean, kids are getting so much. So it's, we're following the balanced literacy approach with phonics built in, with a systematic phonics instruction.
And what about at Sag Harbor? How would,
Bridgehampton.
I'm sorry.
See, at Bridgehampton, we use the reading and writing workshop model, balanced literacy approach. We have had conversations about really focusing on phonics. We adopted the phonics piece and component to TC, which the teachers out of the gate loved because it's something that's been missing from that program for quite a while. So just the fact that they had a very specific program to follow to be able to get these kids inspired about phonics, as opposed to what some would say as the boring breaking down of phonics in a very, I guess, I mean, you said it, but she knocked you on it because it doesn't have to be boring.
Yeah. Right, no, I agree.
And she had many strategies that illustrated that I would want to do it if I were sitting in our class, right? But, and I want to make a point here too, that we say boring, we say dry, we say these things, but, we're adults. That might be dry, that might be boring to us because we are where we are. To children that experience these programs, foundations and programs that are very specific to that word structure and what others would perceive as dry, they think it's really exciting because they're learning to read.
Right.
They're learning to decode. When that spark hits and they see a word team or a vowel team or digraphs that they're starting to recognize now, their head will lift up from their page, and you know this just as good as anybody, if not more, as a reading specialist, that's the beauty of it. So we can't forget that is really important to them because they light up like that
So-
when they're learning to read, however boring we think it may
Children
be.
learn,
Right.
children actually can enjoy learning.
They do.
Absolutely.
There's a great
They do,
accomplishment
and-
feeling that I can almost remember it. We like,
Yeah.
you
I can remember the struggles too.
Yeah, I can remember and trying to sound things out and then finally saying the word and like, I think that's it. It is a great feeling and we forget that. You're right. Thank you for pointing that out because being successful in these little chunks is what makes school possible. I mean, it makes students' engagement in school possible.
Right.
Because if it's just about compliance with rules and doing what you're told, and you don't get that aha moment, if you don't get that, wow, I'm getting better at this.
Or it's not met with the same enthusiasm that they're feeling.
Yes, and it's like, it can be met with yeah, that's what you're supposed to be doing, or so what,
Let's hope that's not the case.
Yes, yeah, but that can't happen because
Yeah.
that's gonna stop learning in its tracks. But you're right, I can almost feel it when I was little, that feeling of, I'm getting this. And every kid has to have that, which that's what we want to accomplish, that feeling. And that doesn't end. If you get kids feeling that way about school, if you get kids saying, wow, I can be good at this. I've seen way too many third graders who have decided they can't be good at this. And by third grade, I always said by third grade, we can see who feels good about school and is going to flourish and who just doesn't think they can do it. And nobody starts that way. Nobody comes into pre-K or kindergarten and say, oh, I'm going to be terrible at this. They all are excited about being at school. And making sure we nurture that excitement, that aha is really, really important for every student. I'm off on a tangent. But
No, it's okay. And so was I. To bring it back to your point with regard to Bridgehampton and what we're doing, It's a balance, you know,
Right.
it's a very intent focus on phonics and
Right.
phonemic awareness, but at the same time, inspiring kids to learn to love to read,
Right.
to be passionate about reading,
Right.
without all of those different like direct structural kind of lessons. It's a balance, you know. And there's also a developmental component to this that we haven't even talked about yet. Like there's a readiness, not just because someone is in kindergarten, this is where you should be. Everybody is
Agreed.
different.
Well, and that's the beauty of balanced literacy, is that children are getting what they need
Yep.
when they're ready for it.
And you meet them
So-
where they are.
Right, and if they're ready to fly and take off, then you can do that in a reading group.
Exactly.
So, you know, when you assess them and you have those conversations with them, then you give them what they need, then they take off, they're good to go.
How much does that have to do with when you were born? You know, what month you're born in and when you start school?
Oh, a lot. I mean, we have a pre-K program and you can see the difference between the 3-year-olds and the 4-year-olds. You know, you can tell the difference just physically. And, you know, as kids grow, you see that the younger ones, that they might take a little bit longer, you know, and I think that has a lot to do with it. And their readiness and their language, and when they started talking, and you know, are they reading? Are they being read to at home? You know, their language, and you know, hearing that, you know, kids don't listen to nursery rhymes anymore, and they don't, you know, when I was little, that's what we listened to in the car, and you know, Hickory Dickory Dock and Mother Goose and all that, like
Right.
that doesn't happen anymore. So that phonemic awareness isn't there, and kids don't know how to rhyme.
But it doesn't have to end.
It doesn't have
Come
to
back.
keep
It can
it.
come back. Yeah.
Let's bring it back.
That is huge.
We should
That's
start
a
a
huge
record
component.
company,
We should,
CD,
yeah, right.
right? But
New and
it's,
improved nursery
it's
rhymes, yeah.
so important, and you know that rhyming skill is huge for reading.
I never thought about that. You're
Well, that's
right.
that whole
Yeah.
phonological awareness piece. We
Right.
keep talking
Right.
about phonemic awareness, which is is more specific to
Right,
segmenting
to
the words, but the
segmenting.
phonological awareness with rhyming and just that attention to. I mean, you can play
hearing
I
those
Spy
sounds.
with words. I mean, if we're talking about
Right.
how we can support parents, there's so many different ways. We sit at the dinner table with me and my children, and we'll come up with one word, and we'll go around and how many you can rhyme to
Right.
it until you're blanked, and then you're
Right.
the one who didn't get it, right?
Right.
There's so many things you can do.
Playing the
We'll get to
license
that. We'll
plate
get to that.
game on the
Yeah,
highway.
so I don't wanna get ahead of myself, but it's true. I
Yeah,
mean, it just segued nicely
Yeah.
because it's true.
Right,
Exactly.
yeah.
Something you said, I'm trying to think. There was something you said I wanted to ask a question. I'm losing it. It'll come back.
But I did just want to add, as far as our program in East Hampton, you know, we did just move towards into reading by HMH, which is a balanced literacy approach. But we've always had a balanced literacy approach. This is just a different program that just has more literature at our fingertips, which is so amazing, and so many resources for differentiation, for English language learners, for you know, to advance, you know, our higher level readers, and the teachers have the curriculum at their fingertips, and it's really been fantastic.
Is there enough of a repertoire of different pieces of literature where students in a certain level have choices on topics?
Yes,
Because I think that's something that was
Yeah,
always
there's-
missing, is
Right.
letting students make a choice on, you know, let's face it, younger boys, they're like dinosaurs and,
Right.
and cavemen and Indians, and looking at topics that are of interest to the
Right.
individuals, I think is something from balanced literacy that is important and should be kept.
our school is chock full of books. Between, you know, our old program and the new program, you know, we just have libraries. We are print rich, and the kids have access to it all. And the teachers have access to it, and, you know, give the kids access to it. And we also have online libraries for the kids to access through this program as well. So they can access books at home if they needed to. You know, they can bring their Chromebooks home and access the library. So kids definitely have their hands on books.
That's nice.
It's great.
Yeah, it's a long way from Dick and Jane.
Yeah, oh,
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely,
Yes.
absolutely.
We talked about sight words. There were, is that 109? Am I getting that right?
Those are high frequency.
High frequency.
Right.
Okay, what's the difference between high frequency and
High frequency are words that it's as it says, it's just you see them most often. So those 109
time.
words exist in most 90% of what would be the adolescent and children literature.
so should they be sight words? If
I
it-
think the idea
is-
the idea is
okay.
that
You know
if
them by sight.
exactly
Okay.
Right.
is
So-
if they develop that sight word long-term orthographic type of mapping
Right,
in their
right.
brain to recognize them, then generally speaking, they will be able to decode. Decoding is not meaning. You also have to know what the words mean. So there's
Right.
I can decode a different language if I'm saying it phonetically accurate in my mind, but I don't understand what it says. There's a difference.
Because you don't have that picture in your head
Exactly,
already.
or-
because
yeah.
of the- Yes.
Right,
yeah.
or the meaning that what these words
Yeah.
actually mean, not just what you've decoded them
Right.
as, you know?
Which,
um,
being able to say it and understanding what it means is two very different things.
Yeah, right.
Fluency. Okay. There's a lot of discussion about shifting from, or how the books are leveled. Whether, I know the old Fontes of Pinnell, it was leveled, they were leveled libraries. They were all leveled by, I think, letters. There were different letters.
Guided reading benchmarks.
Whereas if they're leveled phonetically, the books are gonna be tackling the same decoding strategies as opposed to the kind of leveling Fontes of Pinnell had.
What do you mean by leveled phonetically?
So if you're teaching certain blends that the.
Oh, I see what you're
that
saying.
the
Okay,
the
yes.
the
It's a blend
literature,
book,
it's
so-
it's a book that's
right.
gonna
A
tackle
decodable
that,
text.
right.
Yes,
The
okay.
decodable text.
That's the
Right.
difference.
That is the
Leveled
difference.
readers and decodable readers are
Okay.
different.
Okay,
Totally
so-
different.
So are both used for different purposes? Where are they? And should we have one or the other?
No, we need them both.
Okay,
We need them both.
so what does each one do that's unique and different and why both?
So, kids need to be exposed to authentic literature, authentic text to be able to, read stories and learn theme and genre and, be able to understand the differences between fiction and nonfiction and biographies and autobiographies. And, as they grow as readers, they'll be able to decode those different words within the text, okay?
But now, is this, at what grade level would you be thinking about this?
Right
Right-
away.
right away,
Kids-
okay,
Yeah, even
okay.
if in pre-K or kindergarten, the kids are just looking at the pictures. Kids need to be exposed to authentic literature from day one. And then decodable text is a teaching tool. And it's also where kids feel successful when they're reading books. So if you're working on a specific sound with a child, you can work on a sound and then they can apply it in the decodable text, and that's where they have that success. And, as they grow in that decodable text, it's repetitive and, they learn those sounds, it's, the sight words are repeated, so it might only have maybe 2 or 3 or 4 sight words that the child knows it's in their, repertoire of sight words. So this way they are familiar with those words at that level, and then they can apply them within that decodable book. So then as you assess and get to know your student, you move them up through that decodable text. But then the application comes in that authentic literature.
Okay.
But they need exposure to authentic text.
Yeah,
The pictures are beautiful, the text is rich. They could sit and read with a child who is a reader, with an adult who's a reader, and just getting their hands on those books is so important.
And being able to have those books accessible in according to their interests.
Right. Right, absolutely.
Yeah, you say A Long Way from Dick and Jane. I mean, what these children have accessible to them is incredible. And having a balance of both is super important because decodable texts are an instructional tool. Everything in the decodable text is something that the student has learned, the skills they've learned,
Right.
whether it's, whatever vowel teams you're doing or digraphs, they're gonna see that in there. So it's a
Right.
way to see
And practice.
and actually have them get affirmation out of things that they have learned and they're putting into practice and they can see it in decodable text.
Right.
And it's also not as predictable. You're not gonna find
Right.
that I can ride my bike, I don't know. It is not that repetitive. In early on leveled readers, you're gonna see a lot of that repetitive text, which in a decodable reader, you're not gonna see that as much. I'm talking about the earlier levels for level readers.
Right.
But
So would I be right in saying that decodable books are the practice, the skill development, and then you're gonna apply that in the leveled books
Yes.
to see your progress?
Yes.
yeah, because there are going to be things in that leveled book that they haven't learned yet, that they have to
Right.
go through that productive struggle to get there.
Right.
And I think that in small
Using those
groups or whatever,
strategies
using
that
those
they-
strategies
that you've
they
taught
learn.
them.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
Whether
Productive
they're
struggle.
tapping,
yes.
whether they're
Productive struggle,
chunking, visualization, verbalization.
Exactly.
All right, I wanna just take some time to go back and spend some time giving parents information. Going all the way back to pre-K. What should be happening in the home to support the student's growth in all these different skills? When I think of pre-K, I just remember doing things like you're talking around the table, doing rhymes. But, what could be happening that would start developing these skills, starting the mapping process?
Reading out loud to children, playing songs like nursery rhymes on Alexa. I mean, that's a simple thing. People have Alexa these days. You could play it from your phone. Doing, rhyming games like Mike was saying, sitting in the car and having, I'm thinking of a word that begins with A, and the child has to come up with a word, apple, or, alligator. What rhymes with, happy? And they say,
Yeah.
I don't know.
No,
What
it's
rhymes
true.
with
Tough
happy?
one. Good one.
I picked a better, I don't know.
I
But
just remember,
just having those
yeah.
verbal exchanges, which is also good for their, auditory processing and, helping them build their language. And talking with each other at the dinner table and, playing like picture games with even like a deck of cards. There's so many different things that you can do. Writing in the bathtub with bathtub crayons or shaving cream, practicing your letters. That's
Wait, there's
really
bathtub
important.
crayons?
Yes, there are bathtub crayons. You don't know the bathtub
I'm
crayons?
sorry, my kids are your age, so.
Right. Yeah,
Mine are young, and I
But-
don't know, that might be dangerous at my house.
they could write on the
That's
wall
so
and
fun,
practice
yeah.
their letters, or you
Yeah.
could just put shaving cream on the wall in the bathtub, and they could practice writing their letters or their words. And you could get like little bathtub foam tiles that you can stick on there. But the shaving cream is easy. Like you could just put it up there and they can write
It's
their
messy,
letters.
it's fun.
It's messy and fun, exactly. The kids love
We
it.
used to have all those magnetic letters and
Yes.
numbers all over the house.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
those are great too, though.
Yeah.
Right.
And I just
On the
remember that now.
Just there.
They were
Yeah.
everywhere,
There.
yeah.
The
Mess around with
dishwasher,
them.
Yeah.
right.
Eventually, they will mess with them.
Right.
Yeah.
And giving kids things like catalogs that come in the mail and having them
Oh,
go
yeah.
on treasure hunts for words. Find me a word that begins with F, find me a word that begins with P, and they have to dig through the magazine or the catalog. That's all free stuff that you just
Right.
tell them to look for it and give them a crayon and they just have to circle them. They're just looking for words. That's a fun activity. Or cutting out the picture and matching it with a word, and then they have to glue it on or tape it on a piece of paper or just sort it.
Okay, so now as we move up
Right.
from the.
For the so that's lower
that's
elementary.
Lower elementary. Now give me middle elementary, what should be happening?
Same thing. Kids should be reading every night, 20 minutes every day, super important. Kids need to read. And if they're not sitting and reading by themselves, not every kid likes to do that. Maybe reading with a partner, reading with a family member, just reading to them is, a great way to build comprehension. And while you're reading to your child, asking them questions, who's the character in the story? Where is this story taking place? What ways are you similar to this character? What ways are you different from this character? Have you done some of the things this character has done? And just having those conversations. And then maybe after, you read with your child, having them write about it in a journal or in a notebook, and just writing down what they learned from the story about a connection that they made to the story. And then you can elaborate on that as you go. Have them write letters to the character or have them write, as if they were a character in the story. And I think that writing connection is really great because it helps build their comprehension, it builds their writing skills. All this daily reading builds vocabulary, it improves spelling, it improves so many skills that are necessary.
I'm still working on the spelling thing.
Yeah, it can be
They
challenging.
underline it in Word and then you just hit right click and you'll be
That's
fine.
pretty much it. That's what's got me.
That's why they're
through.
editors.
And there's nothing wrong with reading, it doesn't have to always be, a chapter book or it could be a comic book or a newspaper or a magazine. If your child is interested in sports, get Sports Illustrated for Kids. Give them what they want and that will ignite that fire. Get a book on golf if your son's interested in golf or your daughter's
Gotta hit a
interested
home
in
run
golf.
twice. Same place.
Yeah. So, but just, tap into their interests.
interests,
If they
right.
like to cook, have them read the recipe to you or help, you
yeah.
could sit and cook together and any kind of text. You want a text-rich environment, so anything.
And the writing progressing with.
And the writing progressing as you
Yeah.
go. I think that's a real good way to do that. You can even have, like, I know some families that have a journal that they share, a communication journal with mom and dad, and they write to each other every day or every other day just to communicate back and forth. And it's another great way to practice their writing.
So what age did that become just text messaging back and forth?
I know. See, that's the thing. We get away from
Hopefully
that.
never.
I know.
Hopefully never.
It's,
You can-
and that's
You can
why.
keep that one in there.
Right. A lot of writing skills are lacking because of that. They're texting their parents from their bedroom, can you get me a
Right.
snack?
And emojis cut down a lot of words.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah.
All the abbreviations, IDK.
I don't even know 90% of them, but I know they use them a lot. So, okay, now we get to the third grade.
Right,
Third grade's the big shift. Third grade,
it's a big shift.
you should be, and I'm sure there's, the spectrum of variations within every third grade class, but that's where the switch should be from learning to read to reading to learn,
Right,
in theory. How can we support, that must be a tough year. That
it is.
must be a
The
struggle.
workload is very different, very significant change.
So how is it different and how can we support it at home?
Well, the curriculum is harder, even just as far as humanities and science, there's just a greater, change in, the concepts that are being taught and, the math curriculum is a lot harder in third grade. They need to be able to read the word problems in math, that's very challenging. So making sure kids understand the vocabulary in math and in all the other subjects, I think is really important too. As educators, I think we need to make sure that they understand the words. What does the word addend mean, or division or subtraction, just knowing those concepts. So that will help them with their comprehension in the subject area.
I'm going to go back to the high-frequency words, and then now to the vocabulary words that come with each different content area as it reach. Are parents given those lists?
Content-specific lists?
Well, yeah, I'm thinking, do they know the vocabulary that's coming up in social studies in third grade? And do they know those 109 high-frequency words? Or a portion of those that should be worked on in pre-K and a portion of those that should be worked on in kindergarten and.
Well, the high frequency, I'm sorry.
No, go.
Oh, the high frequency words at the lower levels, the parents are aware of.
Okay,
But as far as the content specific words, I haven't really seen it where, there's, we don't do formal spelling tests in the upper grades. So it's more exposure within the, it's during the day in the curriculum and their, repetition of it and showing it to the kids and explaining what they mean and using visuals for that and having it posted in the classrooms and, on a word wall. What does this content area word mean? Where will you see it? How will it be used? So I haven't seen the content area words necessarily shared with parents. But I perhaps they are, I know I can't speak to that exactly, you know, they might be through the curriculum if there's like a parent letter.
Yeah, you know, if a parent wants to know, they can get them.
Right.
I mean, they're available. And this day and age with the digital textbooks that
Right,
that
that's
exist,
true, that's true.
Yeah.
students have access to these digital textbooks. Parents, all they have to do is get in with their children,
Right.
and they can
Right,
see
right.
what's coming. They can see what is there. They can, I mean, they provide a synopsis of what to expect in the units at
Right.
any content area. So it is available. All you have to do is ask. I mean, to empower parents to be advocates for that is huge too. If we're you know, educating parents on what they can do, advocate for that, because you can do it.
Right.
And teachers do share it. They do.
Yeah, I'm sure they do, yeah.
Right, and we send parent letters home for ELA and math, you know, weekly about updates in the curriculum. So the parents are aware of the topics that are being, you know, discussed in class. But like as far as like a specific content area word list, I haven't necessarily seen that. So,
Now I'm gonna go same topic, but a little different take on it. We have a significant portion of our students whose first language is not English. That makes it more difficult. I taught ESL in the city, but to high school students.
right,
So I had 18 to 21-year-old students who didn't speak any English coming into my school. And that was a challenge. That was, you know, it was difficult and going back 30 some odd years at this point. So the resources and the online stuff we have now was not there. And any resources I could find were all geared to reading in first, second, third grade. So almost insulting in content. How do you deal with that you've got someone who comes in third grade, from a Spanish-speaking country? What are the first steps? Because I remember the first thing I had to figure out was, where are they in their home language? Is that still the first thing you would do, is figure out where were they in
yes,
reading in their home language?
yes,
Okay, and then what? Then how do we
I would say
move
step one is
forward?
making them feel comfortable.
Right,
And
well,
okay,
yes.
and okay to feel like
right, feel
they're in a
safe,
place where it is very foreign and very challenging,
Right.
and to respect that and embrace that is absolutely step one, because everything is secondary to the way they're feeling in the class.
Agreed.
Step one.
100%, you're right.
It is an incredible challenge, you know, when someone is, and you're saying third grade, so.
Yeah, it's a tough
they
time,
have- so
for everybody,
it
now a
is.
tough time to start.
Right.
It is, so just respecting the process, meeting them where they are, understanding where they are, like you said, in their home language and the factors at home. You know, their parents and whomever's with them every single day, you know, what's their experience, because they're gonna be the ones that help to support when they're not in school. So that's a big piece too. Developing that communication and bridge of resources between the classroom teacher and the school and the parent, and also reinforcing the advocacy for a parent for their kid, and doing everything you can to support them. So it's a challenging thing, but understanding multiple factors as opposed to just that they're in a place where they don't speak the language it's more pieces to the puzzle than that.
Yeah, a lot.
Yeah.
And now, we talked about all those things parents could be doing at home. If the parents speak Spanish, all those same strategies in Spanish, would that still be helpful for a child learning English?
If you're talking about the questions of comprehension, internalizing what they're reading, developing strategies to understand that reading is a process that you engage in, that you participate in, it can still be print rich, it can
Right.
still be in their native language. And what I heard when you were going through all of those things at different levels, it was wonderful. But what I did hear was that it's work.
Yes.
You have to put in the
It's
work. It's not going to happen on its own.
No.
And it takes a lot of work from us as teachers, from us as parents at home with our
Right.
children. It doesn't happen by itself, and the schools are there to support. with anything that you would need for resources at home, but it's also important that, and I know, I mean, everyone's home life is different. I know a lot of our parents work very late.
Yes.
But it's also
Absolutely.
really important that you carve out the time to really engage in those conversations, to engage in reading to them and modeling that yourself. Because if you're reading alongside of them at whatever level, upper level, you know.
Even in your home, the home language, it's- I
Absolutely.
think it's still.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. So those upper level strategies, they absolutely apply.
Right,
At the early onset level of understanding like the word structure and at a third grade level when they're still trying to learn a different language, you gotta meet them where they are and also get them to understand that you're not behind, you're not less intelligent, it's a different language, you're here to work together.
agreed.
And I would hope that the objective is not to lose your Spanish,
No,
but
absolutely
to,
not.
but to be bilingual, which
Right.
I regret immensely. I mean, we're the only country in the world that's a monolingual country.
Right,
Everywhere else you go, they speak multiple languages. I feel so stupid when I'm in another country and then, you know, it's so impressive. Everybody speaks English and whatever else, and maybe another
Whatever
third
else.
on top.
right, right.
So I would imagine the objective for every student we have would be to be bilingual.
Right,
By the time
Absolutely.
they graduate, which would be wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
Here was always my hardest conundrum with newly arrived ENL students was trying to figure out whether the struggles they were having were due to just, it's a new language, or was there something else cognitively going on? Was it a processing problem?
Right,
And I've everybody I've ever spoken to about this is like, it's still an incredibly
it's a challenge.
challenging decision. Do we have any new tools? How do we, again, what would be first step when you're concerned about that?
Well, we have a very cohesive intervention process at our school, on-call response to intervention, where the classroom teacher would first start a classroom tier 1 intervention to support the child who's struggling. So in addition to that, the child would be receiving services with an ENL teacher. So as the child moves through the tiers of the intervention process, tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3, the child is progress monitored based on a skill that they are weak in. So there are close eyes on this child to see, where the child is struggling. And, the specialist that is working with the child will help to determine if it's a language issue or if it's a reading issue or something else. So a committee meets every week to discuss the progress monitoring and, how the child is doing and moving through these tiers. And at that point, when it comes to a time where you're determining if a child should be tested or not, you have these conversations with the specialists in the field, with the ENL teacher, with the special ed teachers, with the reading specialists, and you look at the data and you look at this child's daily progress and you try and figure out, is this a language issue or is this a learning issue? And sometimes you're not really sure. So you might have a speech and language pathologist take a look at the child, informally to see, what they observe in the classroom and maybe look at the data or be a part of that conversation. And then maybe perhaps if you do decide to move to testing, then that child could perhaps be tested in their home language. So then that will help us to determine if it really is a language issue or if it's a learning issue. But it is a very daunting task because, what is our end goal? To support the child, right? And you want to make sure that they are getting what they need. So in the meantime, they're getting this intervention, you're supporting them, which is a great thing. And they're getting that, starts off as, one-on-one to small group to, again, one-on-one instruction. So they're getting what they need, but then you have to make that decision on where do we go with this if they're not making any progress. And that's where that, that group decision-making comes in.
Okay. And now, when you say not making progress,
In the intervention.
would there be a time period where you say, okay, now we have to rethink this? Would it-
Oh, yes, we have very strict, criteria that we follow. There's a certain amount of time that they would be at a tier 1 intervention, and then at a tier 2 intervention, and then at a tier 3 intervention. And, we meet every 8 weeks on a child. So it could take, probably about a year and a half before that, decision is made to move to testing. So we have a lot of data then and a lot of information on that child before that quick decision. It's never a quick decision, is my point. We really think it through and make sure that it's not, that we're
It's not
making
an
the right
arbitrary
decision.
decision,
It's not an arbitrary decision,
Well,
exactly.
we're just about out of time, so I'd like to thank you both for sharing all your knowledge with us. It's been, I've learned a lot. I hope people who watch have learned a lot. And parents, read to your students. I don't care what language it is. Read.
Read,
Play
read,
those
read.
games, do
Yes,
those
play
rhymes.
games.
It
Yes.
will help.
Yeah.
As always, I'd like to thank the East End Education Foundation for supporting this series. They've been funding unique educational experiences and scholarships for the children of East Hampton for over 17 years. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Bob.
And that's all right.